And often I challenge my fellow scientists and I say, what do you do science with? I do it with my brain. I do not believe the brain and the mind are the same, but that's a debate for another time. Let's agree with them, we do it with our brain. So I said, tell me the brief history of the brain. And often they'll say something like this: the brain is the end product of a mindless, unguided process. And I look at them and I say, and you trust it? And I've done this with many people. I said, look at this computer. If you knew that it was the end product of a mindless, unguided process, would you trust it? And I always force them to an answer. I've always, without exception, got the answer no. And I said, I see you have a problem. A real problem. You see, this has now moved into mainstream of the philosophical argument. So let's go. They often ask me where I get the argument because they see I'm not bright enough to think of it for myself. Well, that's okay. So I said I got it from Charles Darwin, actually. And that surprises them. With me, he wrote, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. And that leads Plantinga, and we'll go back to him, to point out the deep conflict between science and atheism. If Dawkins is right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then he's given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties. This is Darwin. And therefore, inevitably, to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own atheism. One of the reasons I'm sitting here as a person who believes in God is not because I'm a Christian, but because I'm a scientist. I find it impossible to espouse a philosophy that essentially reduces human rationality, with which I need to do science, to meaninglessness. And what is most interesting is Thomas Nagel's take on this, the philosopher of science in New York, who wrote a book with an explosive subtitle. I could scarcely believe it when I first saw it. Mind and Cosmos, Why the Neo-Darwinian View of the World is Almost Certainly False. And if you Google that and see the debate it has unleashed in cyberspace, it's really fierce. And his point is this: if the mental is not itself merely physical, it cannot be fully explained by physical sciences. Evolutionary naturalism implies that we shouldn't take any of our convictions seriously, including the scientific world picture on which evolutionary naturalism itself depends. And this is so important because you and I are living in the so-called information age. And the one thing that's true of information is that it is not material. It's often carried, as you see, on a material base. And the moment you see something, information, which is hard to define, but just let it stand for the moment. The moment you see a word, you immediately know that whatever natural processes are involved in putting this picture up on the screen, there's a mind behind it. You immediately intuit that. It's a perception that's automatic and universal. And Roger Sperry, another Nobel Prize winner, said the meaning of the message will not be found in the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink. And I've often confronted people with that question and held up a menu. And when they tell me they're a materialist, they're a reductionist, everything must be explained bottom up in terms of physics and chemistry. And that must be true if there's no God. You've no option. So I say to them, look at that menu, and if it says roast chicken, I say, look, how do you know it's roast chicken? Well, I've learned English. Okay, R-O-A-S-T, 5 letters. They're semiotic, they carry meaning. Now you explain to me, if you're a reductionist, you explain to me that word and its meaning in terms of the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink. Nobody's able to do it. They can't do it because they have to postulate mind. Now, if you have to postulate mind, to explain that, even though many physical processes are involved, with a 5-letter word, what are you going to do with this? Which is just about 3.4 billion letters in the right order. If you take the reductionist, materialist, atheistic view, I will say to you, you have a huge problem. And this is one of the reasons why I'm fascinated by the Genesis account, simple account, but it's brilliant, that talks about a word-based universe created in a sequence of speech acts, and God said, and so on. This is profound stuff, and I wish I had time to explain it to you. You may want to ask questions about it, but the critical thing that's being explained is that our universe is not a closed system of cause and effect. It's an open system into which God speaks. There's an informational input from the mind of God. And you see, that means that as a scientist, one of the most resonant statements that makes sense of the world as I see it, the world of science, is this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be that came to be. If something comes to exist, we always ask for a cause. The universe came to exist. You came to exist. And what we've got to look for is an explanation that makes sense. And I believe that the word-based universe idea makes perfect sense. But then that raises an even bigger question, because the biblical claim is that the Word became human and dwelt among us. That raises a series of huge questions. It's the reason I'm a Christian.